Before Angkor filled the horizon, the jungle hid a capital. Mahendraparvata, straight streets beneath roots, reservoirs in terraces, a temple mountain on the summit. LiDAR peeled back the leaves, and a planned city appeared. This wasn't a stray shrine. It was the first capital that taught an empire how to rule. Tonight, we open what the forest kept and ask, why build a mountain capital to govern a floodplain? Hidden capital under the jungle. Mahendraparvata, Phnom Kulen, Angkor. How a mountaintop experiment became the blueprint for the Khmer Empire. From the air, Phnom Kulen looks like a sleeping leviathan. Long, forested, self-contained. Streams spill off its flanks, carving brown ribbons that become life for the plains below. To the west lies the basin where Angkor will one day rise. But up here, the air is older, quieter, closer to the gods. In the 8th and early 9th centuries, lowland polities jostled and bargained. The Mekong whispered one future, the Tonle Sap another. Amid that noise, a prince with big ideas climbed a mountain and chose height over heat, isolation over interference. Phnom Kulen over everything. He would call it Mahendraparvata, the mountain of Indra. Not just a retreat, but a capital, an altar, and an experiment in power. To build an empire, you need 3 things: order, water, and a convincing story about why you should rule. The jungle could crush stone, but if you learned its rhythms, monsoon, soil, slope, you could make it sing. The mountain had springs. The plateau had room. The gods had an address. If the king could bind heaven to earth here, the lowlands would listen for centuries. Mahendraparvata was a rumor in inscriptions, a name on a broken lintel, a story told by monks under smoky lamps. Then came the 21st century, and a plane that painted the forest with light. LiDAR, pulses of laser measuring distance, stripped the leaves from the map without cutting a single branch. What emerged was not a lone temple, but an urban grid, orthogonal streets, embankments like spine bones, clusters of shrines, dams, barays, quarries, a whole designed landscape, hiding in plain sight. The mountain wasn't just sacred, it was planned. Imagine walking through that grid as it wakes, axes aligned like thoughts. Laterite roads packed firm beneath bare feet, pilgrims threading from shrine to shrine, incense leaning in the morning breeze. Up here, the Khmer were trying ideas they would later scale to the horizon. How to terrace a slope, how to slow a seasonal river until it became policy, how to turn rainfall into memory stored in stone and earth. Mahendraparvata is the sketch. Angkor will be the painting. He arrives not as a god, but as a problem solver. A prince who learned too much about chaos, who watched factions coil and strike, who decided that rule needed a story stronger than swords. On Kulen, he finds both privacy and theater. Here, the sky feels close enough to sign treaties with. Rituals don't echo, they land. In a ceremony whispered about in later texts, Jayavarman II invokes the devarāja, the god-king principle, not as vanity, but as infrastructure. Make the king the axis mundi, the world's axle, and everything else aligns around him, like spokes. One act, one mountain, a center that everything else will use to measure itself. Let me draw it for your mind's eye. A plateau cut with straight lines, roads wide enough for carts, embankments channeling wet season tantrums into tame pools, temple mounds like punctuation marks across the text of the land. A stepped pyramid, Rongchen, rising like a prototype of power. Its terraces teaching stone how to speak with sky. There are quarries where the bedrock bears the scars of ambition. Ponds that mirror clouds while holding grain in waiting. Shrines that form a liturgical network. Because a capital isn't just governed, it's walked. Between the shrines, fields. Between the fields, families. Between families, the quiet mathematics of empire. Taxes flowing, water stored, prayers exchanged for legitimacy. On Kulen, water isn't background, it's law. Engineers stitch the slope with earthworks, catch the rain, slow the runoff, let the plateau drink, then release it, patient and useful to the plains. Each reservoir is a paragraph, each canal a sentence. Together they spell a contract. The ruler holds back the chaos of season, and in return, the people hold up the state. What Angkor will do later with vast barays, Kulen rehearses in miniature because the lowlands are noisy. Politics, rival courts, foreign hands. A mountain lets you prototype out of reach, compose without interruption, and consecrate your experiment before you scale it. Also, the optics. If you want to become a pivot between heaven and earth, it helps to stand somewhere the sky feels near. A stonecutter taps a chisel and listens. Each ring a promise that the block will fit where ritual says it must. A waterkeeper walks the embankment before dawn, fingers trailing dew, counting his way from shrine to pond to spillway. His footsteps an audit of faith and physics. A young acolyte memorizes the names of shrines, and the shorter, secret names only the priests use when the incense is nearly gone. Up here, empire smells like wet laterite, resinous smoke, and rice steaming in bamboo. The God King idea gets misunderstood as costume jewelry for power. But listen closely. On Kulen, the ritual is a protocol. It binds lords who otherwise might pull apart. It authorizes the grid. It makes the waterworks a mandate, not a suggestion. A capital is not just walls and offices. It's agreement, crystallized into stone and ceremony. The plateau gives, and it takes. Soils tire, canopies reclaim, roads blur back into root work. Even in its own time, Mahendraparvata likely flickered. Times of tidy order, times when green began to argue with geometry. But that's what makes it important. It's the lab where the Khmer learned how much maintenance empire costs, how much labor belief requires, and how to design for repair. Later, on the plains, they'll build systems you can sweep, dredge, seasonally reset. Less mountain stubbornness, more lowland patience. When the capital idea leaves Kulen, it doesn't abandon the mountain. It descends with it. The roads become wider, the reservoirs vast enough to swallow the sky. The temple mountains taller, smoother, the grid now continental in ambition. But in the DNA of Angkor's masterpieces, you can still taste Kulen, the confidence to align a city with a compass, the conviction that water can be a throne, that a king can be a story the landscape tells about itself. Fast forward a millennium. Scholars tramp through vines with notebooks and guesses. Villagers tell stories of old stones, swallowed by figs. Then, the LiDAR flights. The jungle peels back on a screen. Archaeologists stare at a ghost city drawn in pale relief. Avenues like ribs, ponds like eyes, shrines like constellations you only see if you turn the map tonight. In a way, Mahendraparvata is crowned twice. Once by Jayavarman's ritual, and again by light discovering what leaves tried to keep. If you're watching this on a phone, widen your eyes for a moment and imagine a slow dolly over emerald canopy. Then a LiDAR overlay etches lines where none should be. Cut to a hand brushing Laterite edges. Moss retracting like old curtains. Pull back to a topographic model. Water runs downhill in ghostly blue, pooling where reservoirs sit, exactly where the forest insists nothing is. The lesson is not lost city found, it's prototype recognized. Kulen shows the logic Angkor will scale. Building a mountain capital is paid in backs and seasons. Porters climb until their calves sing. Masons pass blocks along lines that look like prayer. Farmers wager on water that must arrive on time to survive. Modern rediscovery has its costs too. Footpaths widen. Souvenir stands appear. The line between reverence and commerce thins. To honor the past, we have to learn how to visit without undoing what time spared. 1. The sacred grid. Spiritual alignment isn't decoration, it's governance. Axes and shrines knit people into a pattern they can inhabit. 2. Water states. Hydraulic design is policy made physical. Reservoirs aren't ponds, they're promises. 3. Prototype to platform. Great empires practice small before they build big. Kulen is version 1.0. Angkor is the public release. Rongchen at dawn. Mist lifting. Terraces in silhouette. A priest cups water, sets it down. The camera lingers on the ring of ripples. Geometry meeting gravity. Edge of a quarry. Tool marks under lichen. A dragonfly hovers in the old cut. Stone drinks sunlight like a delayed payment. Forest road at night. Fireflies drift over a ruler-straight earthwork. A line so true you can feel it in your feet even when you can't see it. Some capitals shout. Others learn to whisper and wait for the right ears. Mahendraparvata hid because it could. Because its real work was invention, not display. Because mountains keep secrets. And because sometimes, to become a center, you first need to be alone. Did Mahendraparvata fail? No, it finished. It taught the Khmer what a capital must do, and what it must never forget to do again. When the mountain was done teaching, the empire went to school on the plains. What fell were walls and roofs. What didn't fall were habits of alignment, of watercraft, of using story as scaffolding. We speak of the jungle as a thief, but here it is also an archivist. Vines erase and yet protect. Roots crack and yet cradle. The green hand that hides also keeps. And when we come with light instead of blades, it gives things back. Late 8th, early 9th century. Kulen chosen, grid laid, shrines multiplied, water tamed. 802 CE. Jayavarman's consecration, devarāja invoked, center proclaimed. Through the 9th century, experiments consolidate. Capital ideas descend to the plains. 10th and 12th centuries, Angkor rises colossal, inheriting Kulen's logic. Centuries later, jungle overtakes. Stories dim. 21st century, LiDAR redraws the invisible. Mahendraparvata re-enters the conversation. Close your eyes and hear it. Not the roar of court processions, but drip, 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 water finding the shape engineers gave it long ago. A king speaking softly to stone, and stone answering. I remember, if you build anything that lasts, a channel, a company, a culture, start with a prototype where the world can't interrupt you. Bind your story to your systems. Make your water flow on time. Then scale. That's Mahendraparvata's memo to the future, written in terraces and ponds and mailed 1,000 years later by light. From the air, the jungle looks seamless, but look harder, and you'll see rectangles where leaves pretend to be wild. A capital is hiding in there. Patient, practical, sacred without spectacle. Before Angkor dazzled the horizon, Kulen taught it how. One mountain, one prototype. A quiet city under green, and the empire that learned to listen. If you want more hidden blueprints behind famous empires, subscribe, ring the bell, and meet me next time, where the map looks empty, but isn't.